Listen-only mode.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the TAEUS and Patent Books webinar on TAEUSworks. Happy New Year to everyone. This is Art Nutter speaking, and I'm happy to see all of you that have joined in here today because we've got a lot of very, very interesting things to discuss this morning. Without further introductions here, because it's only me talking here today. But I want to tell you about TAEUSworks. TAEUSworks is a methodology that TAEUS, in its actually 25th year, has put together from working with many of the world's largest patent owners. I don't know if you know this. This is a little bit of history, but TAEUS' very first customer was AT&T back in 1992. AT&T had just purchased NCR, and we went in there and said, "Hey, do you know really what patents you acquired in that acquisition?" They said, "No." I said, "Well, we think we can help you figure those out," and we did. But the next significant effort we did in evaluating patents was for IBM. IBM in 1994, believe it or not, was down to about 30 days worth of cash. That was not a well-known fact. But in fact, their licensing program was yielding a couple $100 million annually. And yet, the team up there that consisted of Marshall Phelps, Emmett Murtha, Hans Houston, and a whole bunch of other really smart guys, Jerry Rosenthal and those guys, all said, we're making a couple $100 million, but we're only really licensing about 100 of our 25,000 patents. Is there any, and do you think there's anything else in there? And I said, well, I think so. And so we went through their portfolio and identified lots of other very valuable patents that other people were using. But that process was very manual, and in fact, there were no rules at that point. So we fast forward a bit, and we've had to improve the process of evaluating patents. And now, and of course, the pendulum swung a long way the other way. Keep in mind, when we were doing this process of evaluating patents back in those days, it was a very manual process. And you had to read all the patents, and there was just no good way to do it, no substitute for reading the patents. But yet, as software became more effective at sorting and searching through the patents, and because much of the patent data back then was actually still paper, you couldn't really analyze it in a software context. But in fact, I think it was IBM that first contracted with the U.S. Patent Office to actually put all the patent information into a computer searchable database. Once it was done that way, then of course you could use software tools to manipulate it. And the pendulum swung hard to the left. I don't know if it was left or right, but I mean, it swung hard to the other direction, where people said, oh, well, I want to get an instant answer. Which are our best patents? And if I press this button with this little software tool, out magically will pop the very best patents. Well, in fact, that was an extreme, the opposite direction, because we have found that software tools will yield the best patents some of the time. And I have to emphasize some of the time. It doesn't do it all the time. But when you're talking about real money in the context of making extremely important decisions, whether you litigate with someone or in the context of a patent book, and I'm not going to get into patent books in detail today, but when you're talking in the context of a patent book, it's important to absolutely, unequivocally identify the best patents because those tier 1 patents get half of the money that is distributed to the patent owners in a patent book. You got to be absolutely right. And so, in fact, the process of identifying the very best patents, we believe, and I think we've got much industry experience that says you use your software tools to get you a first cut. And that reduces the volume of patents that you actually have to read. But at the end of the day, you do have to read the patents. So, as you know, we at TAEUS have pioneered a new licensing model entitled patent books, which is, of course, the aggregation of tens of thousands of patents all in a single place that are available for license via a single click. And you license tens of thousands all at the same time via the single click. And then that provides massive freedom to operate for anybody who wants who is working in that space. And then, of course, the money that is earned by the patent book, the vast majority of it is distributed out to the patent owners according to the quality of the patents. And so the top 2% get half the money. The second 13% get 35% of the money. But every patent receives some money. So here's the thing. I'm sharing the web page of the patent books because I want everybody to know, and you can follow along either on my screen or go to patentbooksinc.com if you like on your own and get this stuff. Because here's the deal. If you take a look at this section on the Patent Books webpage, I want to go and focus on the TAEUSworks criteria today. Okay, this gets you up here and it shows you some of the stuff in here. I suppose there's probably a better way to get to this, but if you hit the evaluation criteria right here, this is what we're going to focus on today. Okay, this criteria here is divided into 4 categories. And the first is whether or not it's accepted or rejected into a patent book. And again, we're not going to focus on this today, so I'm going to skip all this. But you can read this at your leisure. Let's focus on the technical criteria today. And you can see that this is, I'm going to make it a little bit bigger here so you can read it a little bit better. I just want you to be able to see this today so that you can see it. Okay, so the technical criteria are arguably the most unique criteria on evaluating a patent. And I say that not out of a sense of pride, although I do have quite a bit of pride in the TAEUSworks process. But the TAEUSworks criteria has been formulated, like I said, over 25 years of evaluating our clients' patents for them and telling them these are the good ones and these are the ones you can make money and these are the ones you shouldn't waste a whole lot of time on. And the vectors that are used to identify the best patents fall into 3 categories. They're legal criteria, that legal vector, an economic set of criteria, and that's the economic vector, as well as, of course, as the technical vector, the technical criteria. Now, in our experience and the experience of most of our customers, if you're a good lawyer, you can usually evaluate the claims of any patent depending on, independent of the technology of the patent, because the legal criteria are pretty standard across the many technological disciplines. On the other hand, in the same vein, actually, we've got the economic criteria. And I'm oversimplifying this, obviously, but if the patent is used in a product that's making money, then that's better than if the patent is not making money, not because it's not being used in a product that makes money. But there are subcategories also in the economic criteria. But a good economist can actually also look at any patent in any technological area and and make a judgment call on that. And so the skill set required for the legal and economic criteria is pretty standard, and so those are there. The technical one is unique. You have to have somebody who actually knows the technology that's described in the patent. In that technical, or you have to have somebody who has that technical discipline. In other words, I mean, I'm an engineer, for instance. I'm a mechanical engineer by degree. I have a mechanical engineering degree I hang on the wall. In fact, I'd look around the wall, see if it's up here somewhere. I don't think it is. But anyhow, I do have a mechanical engineering degree. And yet, if in much of the TAEUS history, we've done electronics, software, high-tech kind of things. And in fact, I personally am not qualified to evaluate a high-tech kind of product. The high-tech patent has to be evaluated by somebody who has that particular skill set. And then it gets, high tech is a broad category. I can't say that, a smart guy in high tech can evaluate all high tech patents, because that's not true either. Because high tech gets further subdivided into very technologically specific things. For instance, if you're looking at a graphics processor patent, you got to have a graphics processor guy evaluate the technical aspects of the patent. And if you have a software patent, that graphics processor guy is no good looking at the software patent, unless, of course, the software patent has to do with graphics processing, but that's a different story. But generally speaking, a software guy has to take a look at the software patents, and it has to be, can't just be broad-based software, because a digital signal processor software guy would not be the right guy to take a look at a database software patent. So you see what I'm saying? You just have to pay attention to those kind of things. Oh, by the way, also, since we've got we've got a very, very good sized crowd today, many attendees here, but I would like to invite anyone on here, if you have a question, to drop me a note and so forth, because I'm happy to address your questions as they come up. And you can put up a hand even if you like, because if you put up your hand on this thing, then I'll unmute you, and we can talk. I like these things to be interactive. And I see many names here on the list of attendees that I know. So you can't see me right now. I turn on my camera, but I got a Airborne T-shirt on, and so I'm not dressed for prime time. I'll put it that way. Anyhow, so let's dive into these criteria. Okay, the technical criteria again are very, very, very unique, and you've got to have engineers who know this stuff evaluate the patents directly. Okay, so a quick overview. The things that we're looking for here are things that would enable a patent to be enforced. So when I say enforced, if you have a patent and you think another guy is using it and you can't prove it, then your patent's no damn good. Okay, and we'll talk about a few examples on this. Okay, so let's take a look at this first one here, and again, quick overview: observability, ease of investigation, the novelty, the originality of the invention, utility, is it actually used? Where is it in the technology life cycle? That's technology maturity. Availability of alternatives, is that the only one? Is that the only way of solving the problem, or other ways possible? Possibility of commercial use. Is this actually being used or not? Is this validity thing? The validity is stuff that has occurred over the last few years. Supreme Court decisions and so forth have affected this. Other patents might be in the way, other licenses, standards, so forth like that. So we'll go through all these, and this is the one page here in this presentation that we do. The other thing I want you all to know is this industry, our industry, is screaming for standards. And we humbly submit the TAEUSworks criteria as being a good standard, a good de facto standard for doing this, because it actually has worked in yielding the best patents in all of our clients' patent portfolios. And mind you, TAEUS is quite proud to claim that 93 of the top U.S. patent holders have been our clients over the years. So anyhow, let's go into observability. Observability is, can you see this invention in a product or a service? Okay, it's not limited to product, even though that's what the language says here. Okay, and the weighting factors here are calculated. But before I get into the weighting factors, let's talk about the observability. These criteria, you can read these things yourself. The extremes are that you can't see it. If you can't see this invention in a product, you get a very low score. There's your 1 here, okay? And I will tell you that if you can't see that invention, the evidence of that patent in a product, no matter how much reverse engineering, no matter how you can do things, the patent's not very valuable, because you would never be able to enforce it in a court. You just couldn't do it. Let me give you a couple examples of things. Well, before I get into the examples, I'm going to talk about the opposite extreme. The opposite extreme is it's right there. It's in the product literature. It's on the web. You can just look for it. And there are many patents that describe things that are advertised. So I use this metaphor about things that are observable. And let me reference a cake. I'm talking about just a basic layer cake. My wife does these fancy cakes, in the round pans with icing and the goop in between the 2 layers and all that. I'm more of a simple guy. If I'm baking a cake, I put it into one of those rectangular pans, square or rectangular, and then I just throw the cake mix in there and bake it up, put some icing on it, call it done. All right. Now, let's suppose I had a patent on baking a cake, and I just described to you what my cake looks like. It's in a metal pan, has cake batter in the middle, and I put it in the oven, bakes cake, and I put icing on the top of it. If I was able to have a patent on that, I could easily prove if somebody else has used my patent, because I'd take that cake out to my garage and take it through a bandsaw. My kids will tell you that I've taken many other things through the bandsaw, just in terms of my thing, but that's a sidebar as well. Anyhow, if I go through take the cake through the bandsaw while it's still in the pan, I'm going to have a nice cross section of that cake that'll show the metal pan, the cake, and the icing layer on the top. Now, that's a very observable patent, because I can see all those things. If my patent says it's got to be in a metal pan, got to have the cake, and got to have the icing on the top. Second, on the other hand, the other extreme of that would be if I had a patent on the mix, and I bet you Betty Crocker probably has a patent maybe on their cake mix. I don't know what goes in their cake mix, but if all I have in the final analysis is the cake in the pan, and my patent has to do with the mix and the process of baking the cake. In other words, you buy the Betty Crocker mix, you put a particular amount of water in it, you throw in eggs, a little bit of oil, and you cook it for a particular temperature for a period of time. Then I would not be able, unless that. I mean, in Betty Crocker cases, it's actually not a very good example, because though that process is actually fully described on the back of the box. On the other hand, people don't win baking contests typically using Betty Crocker cakes. Okay, it's a good cake, but it's just easy. People win baking contests because they have their own secret recipe of flour and maybe some yeast or baking powder and some salt and some other sorts of things that go in there, plus a predetermined amount of eggs and water, and maybe they throw a little bit of milk. Who knows what they put in there? But if they win that contest and all I have is their cake at the end of it, there's no way on this earth that I can determine through any sort of reverse engineering analysis what their mix of the cake really was. You know, how hot the oven was, how long it was in the oven. There's no way I can do that. It's a physical impossibility. That would be a low scoring, a low observability score. And of course, there are metrics in between. So hopefully you understand what I'm talking about on those ones. Okay, let's go to the next criteria: ease of investigation. Now this one again, low scores means you can do it, but it's going to be off. You can investigate it, but it's going to be very, very expensive and a huge hassle. On the other hand, the easy stuff would be take a look at a data sheet or something on the web or so forth, and again, that investigation methodology is very, very easy. So that's a high score. I will tell you though that these two criteria, observability and ease of investigation, actually contrast with one another quite often because they do not align themselves quite often. Let me give you an example of that. Suppose we had, and this is a high-tech example, but suppose we had a patent that talked about an operational amplifier that was put together by wiring up a dozen transistors in a particular sequence. Okay, not a very realistic patent. In fact, we saw many patents like this in our client's patent portfolio years ago. And we'd say, okay, fine, yeah, we could. These are very observable because you can, a high score here would be a 4 because the positive answer can be obtained via reverse engineering. You can reverse engineer any chip anywhere and identify a dozen transistors wired up. That's very explicit proof that the patent is being used. However, that's contrasted by ease of investigation, because if you think, say, an Intel or AMD processor might be using your operational amplifier, the reverse engineering is super tough because the feature sizes are so small. Okay, so you could have a high score, a 4 here, and have a 1 here on the exact same patent because it's easy to see, but very, very difficult to get it. Okay, so now an operational amplifier, you might be able to test it somehow, but it could come up here a little bit. But these are things that, again, that a subject matter expert in that particular technical area has to evaluate, because there's no way a software tool is going to know that. Okay, let's talk about novelty or the technical advantages. Okay, this is what can you build something without this invention? And sometimes in the patent pool land, not patent books, but patent pool land, you come across patents like this, that this is the only way to solve this technical problem. If that's the case, then yes, it has a higher score. Okay, but I'll tell you what, especially if you take a look at the distribution of income and the distribution of quality in anybody's patent portfolio, the vast majority of the patents have their incremental improvements. It doesn't make that much of a difference. Okay, doesn't mean the product sells for any more money. It just helps it a bit. Okay, those are the lower scores, and in fact, it's been our observation that the vast majority of patents are in these kind of lower categories. They just don't help that much. Okay, so again, scores here are important. Okay, utility. This is the next one. Okay, is this how useful is this thing? Okay, does it actually improve the product in such a way that says, I gotta buy this. I gotta buy this because it is so cool. And we think about on the let's think go back on the launch of the iPhone. The iPhone came out, it had a massive cool factor, and I'm not talking about any specific Apple patent or anybody else's patent for that matter. But one of the things that, well, in fact, we do know of some patents there. One of the cool things about the iPhone when it first came out was a touchscreen display, okay, and a touchscreen keyboard. Now, in fact, there had been lots of different touchscreens before Apple. Apple did not invent the touchscreen, but they integrated things in there that made it very, very desirable because you got rid of the push button, the mechanical keyboard that had been shrunk and put onto like a BlackBerry. Okay, and you know that to many people was an improvement over the standard 1 through 9 or 0 through 9 keypad on a telephone that had the little letters on top of it. Okay, that was better than that. But again, these were the things. Utility is a separate category, but low score here on the manufacturing side. High scores come in here on the side of it makes it a must buy, must have. Okay. Next criteria: technological maturity. Technological maturity is where is it in the product life cycle? Okay, is this brand new? Nobody's used it. If so, it's on the low side, or I should say, it's new and nobody uses it, which is it says it's obsolete. But the fact is, this talks about the age. If you say that somebody is using it and it is new, most of its life's ahead of him, then yeah, it's a high score. But if people are using it and it is at the end of its life, well, it's not worth quite as much. Okay, so there. Availability of alternatives. Again, another technical criteria, but is this the only way of solving the problem? If so, then it's a 5. Okay, we talked to some folks last night in gallium arsenide solar cells, and they talk about nucleosis. The nucleosis of a gallium arsenide solar cell is the key thing. You're not going to make a successful gallium arsenide solar cell without this patent. That is a very, very solid patent. But if you say, all right, it has to have let's talk about metallization. All right, on a metallization on a semiconductor device, well, there's lots of different kinds of metal that are out there now. You can do aluminum, you can do copper, you can do all kinds of other different metallization layers on there. So, having one type of metallization, if you get a patent on that, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be universal. So it's on the lower end of that score. Okay. Again, keep in mind this is not this next criteria, item 7, possibility of commercial use, is again observations by technical people as to whether or not the patent is actually used. The fact of the matter is, patents are so incredibly specific because you have to have a specific invention in order to even receive the patent. It's so granular that many of these inventions are buried in a product. And you've got to have engineers with knowledge of how these things are put together, how they're designed, to really evaluate the possibility of commercial use. Because you may not be able to see it. Going back up here to these criteria, observability, ease of investigation. When you come down here, is it actually being used? Okay. Again, not likely, low score. Highly likely, high score. Okay. Validity. This is kind of gets into a little bit of the legal stuff here, but again, this is a very specific engineering focus here, because a patent by definition is not valid if somebody else has used it or invented it or talked about it before the patent was applied for or filed for. Okay, and then there's other things now as a result of Supreme Court decisions in the last 10, 20 years that talk about obviousness, and these are really, really splitting hairs in terms of technology kind of things. But if it could it be anticipated? Is it one of those things? Well, if A plus B always is going to equal C, but nobody ever wrote it down here, and you try to get a patent on A plus B equals C, and it's like, duh, everybody would know that. Well, then the engineer in that space would say, well, you can't do that. Okay, there's no patent on, for instance, let's talk about sugar and water. If you mix sugar and water, you're going to get some syrup. Okay, and so if you had a patent on mixing sugar and water and you get a syrup, well, that's kind of like a duh. Everybody knows that you'll get some sort of syrup, and you could vary the amounts of sugar and water in there. But these are it's obvious you're going to get some sort of a syrup. Okay, but on the other hand, you say, I'm going to do sugar and water, and I'm going to put some extra special magic dust in here. If we get the magic dust in there, and again, that's not obvious to somebody, and all of a sudden that magic dust makes this sugar and water combination crystallize and come up with some really cool prismatic mirror effects. Wow, that's really cool. And nobody would have considered that to be obvious. And that, on the other hand, is a very, very high level of confidence there. Okay, and I'll come back here because we're going to get into these, uh, um, weighting factors. But because that's important here, the required or blocking patents, again, another type of phenomenon that is now easier to assess by the availability of many, many different software tools that can graphically or otherwise display forward and reverse citations. If you take a look at patents um, that have a granted patent and its reverse citations, there may be patents that are mentioned in its reverse citation that you cannot practice. And my dear friend Mike Lecter does this example, so I'll give credit to Mike. He says, if you have a patent on a chair, and I'm talking about a seat with four legs, um, and your patent improvement is putting a back on that chair so that you can lean back on it and rest a little bit, that still, and you get a patent for that because it is an improvement, you still have to have a license from the guy who has the patent for the chair with the four legs, because your patent with the chair back still requires the seat and the four legs. And so that would be an example of a required or blocking patent. And again, if you're trying to enforce your patent with a on the chair with a back, and you're trying to do that in a vacuum, not a very good patent, because you have to have somebody else's patent, and the guy with the chair with the four legs on it, you got to have his patent in order to enforce yours. Okay. On the other hand, if you have a patent on another chair with bags with a back support, and your patent is on a beanbag chair that doesn't require rigid legs and a rigid seat, but your beanbag is there and it provides you support, it's a different chair altogether. But there's no requirement for the patent on the chair with the rigid legs and the rigid seat. See what I mean? So that's a difference there. Okay, and then are there other licenses required to patent that to practice the technology? The licenses here are are not just other patents. They can also be other contractual requirements. For instance, quite often, government funding yields went to a research into a Sandia or a national lab or the Army Weapons Center or the Naval Weapons Research Center, those kind of guys. Um, those guys yield a bunch of patents and all the smart work that they're doing. But you might need a license from the Air Force or the Department of Energy or something like that in order to practice the technology. If you have to have a license from those guys, again, low score. If you don't, this patent came up and a guy in his proverbial garage came up with it all by himself and you can do a deal with him, that's a much more valuable patent, okay? Here's another one, industry standards. Is this patent incorporated into a standard? If it is, it could be very, very, very valuable because everybody has to use it. On the other one, if there's no industry standard on here, um, well, and when I'm talking about standards, I'm also talking about standards that are not written, de facto standards, for instance. Okay, again, not to beat an example here, but think back on when the iPhone was first launched. I don't remember what year that was, but when the iPhone was first launched, it had this soft keyboard and a screen. You could swipe and all those kind of things. You interacted with your smartphone in a different way. Well, because it was so popular, it turned out that everybody else who was making smartphones had to go that way. Even BlackBerry eventually went that way. And so the way people interacted with their smartphone changed as a result of that. Is there an industry standard that's written? No. But I will guarantee you that if you came out with a phone in which you interacted with it indifferently than you do with the swiping and the soft keyboard today, it's not going to be very popular. Okay, so it became an industry standard on a de facto basis. Okay, commercialization. How difficult is this to build into product? This is different, in fact, than ease of investigation. Ease of investigation is taking things apart. The difficulty in implementation is, can you build this new feature into your phone easily or with a high level of difficulty? And here we're talking about the time to build this in. Obviously, with in my iPhone example here, it didn't require a long time to get into a thing. Now, see, this might sound a little counterintuitive as a valuable patent, but the fact of the matter is, if it takes a long time and somebody still does it, then they've really had to be intentional about incorporating it here, and ultimately, they're really dirty potentially. Okay, and then can you put this in with just reading the patent? Does the patent provide enough information for a person of ordinary skill in the art, the proverbial posita, to build it into their product? Okay, or do you have to know other stuff in order to incorporate this invention into your product? So these are the technical criteria that are involved in TAEUSworks. And as I said to begin with, you have to be intimate with the technology to make these judgment calls. But I will tell you, when you have multiple people, and we say a minimum of 3 engineers looking at a particular patent, that group of 3 engineers will be able to come to a consensus by talking with one another as to whether or not and to come up with a consensus figure here. There may be something that one engineer knows that makes this patent a 4 that the other 2 guys don't know. But if he can't sell it and convince it to the other 2 guys, he can't keep his 4. He may think it's there, but the other 2 guys say, no, dude, this is really a 1, okay? You can't reverse engineer this thing. And they talk the guy off of his 4 down into his 1, okay? That's the kind of dialogue that occurs in the TAEUSworks process because, indeed, you're talking about real money. We're talking about millions and millions of dollars that will go to a Tier 1 patent in the context of a patent book, and again, without litigation. But the weighting factor here of each of these criteria are very, very, very important. Okay, so a total of 10 points goes to all of the technical criteria. And again, you can see all this stuff on the web. Observability is worth half a point. Ease of investigation is worth 0.7. And these two combined, obviously you can do the math. I don't need to teach you how to do math, but it's worth more than a point. Okay, so the 1.2. The novelty is worth a full point. The utility is worth a full point. Technical maturity is not a full point, but it's pretty close. And the availability of alternatives, not a full point, but again, pretty close. Okay, validity. The engineer's perspective on validity, not as valuable as the legal guys thing, but it's a good perspective on here, and you don't want to discount it. Okay, blocking patents, again, that's more of a legal criteria, but the engineers will still have a good perspective on here that the lawyer's not going to have, most likely, because the engineer is intimate with the technology, but we're not going to give him full credit for this thing, so we only give him a half a point. Okay, other licenses, and here's what it is. If you take a look at at this item 9, the item 10, together they constitute a full point. Okay, industry standards, that's worth a full point. Again, you can look that sucker up. And then difficulty of implementation, and this is again split actually with technical know-how on this. And so the combination of difficulty of implementation and the know-how that might be required, again, worth actually more than a point. It's a 1.4. So these are the technical criteria for patent books. And again, this is only one aspect of the trifecta of technical, economic, and then legal criteria that are required for patent books. TAEUSworks in the context of a patent book. So, any questions, ladies and gentlemen? Let me know, because if you do have them, I'm happy to answer them. I'm happy to. You can either type them to me or just put up your hand and I'll unmute you, and you can talk to me. I see a number of different names up here. Okay. Well, if without any questions, I'm sure you have work to do. I have work to do as well. And I thank you for your attendance today, and appreciate this, and so have a great day. God bless.